Marie Antoinette, the last French queen, tragically saw her life cut short at a mere 37 years old. Alongside her husband, she was swept from power amid the upheaval of the French Revolution. Following a trial fraught with uncertainty, she faced grave charges of both incest and treason, culminating in an ultimate death sentence. It was on the solemn day of October 16, 1793, that the guillotine claimed her life. Wrapped in an aura of mystery, countless stories orbit around Marie Antoinette. But beyond the tragic tales, who truly was this extraordinary queen? How did the final heinous moments of her life unfold before the execution? What terrible consequences did she, her children, and her confidants have to endure? Welcome to Intriguing Icons, where we offer you an exclusive front row seat to the most astonishing discoveries of Marie Antoinette's tragic fate. Born on November 2nd, 1755, within the opulent walls of the imperial palace in Vienna, Maria Antonia Josepha Johanna entered the world as the 15th child of the Emperor Francis Stephen I of the Holy Roman Empire. Her mother, Empress Maria Theresa of Austria, ushered her into a world of grandeur and nobility. Baptized an Archduchess of Austria at birth, her lineage could be traced back through her great-grandmother, Elizabeth Charlotte of the Palatinate, connecting her to notable figures like William of Orange. The turning point in her life arrived around May 1770, as she made the transition to French identity by leaving her Austrian roots behind. Her journey led her to France, where she married Prince Louis, the heir to one of Europe's most revered thrones. A mere 14 years old, Marie Antoinette stood at the altar on May 16, 1770, uniting with the French crown prince. The chemistry between them was initially lacking, but the passage of time saw their bond strengthen. Their youthful naivety was palpable. She was a mere 14 years old, while he was just a year older. Their commonality lay primarily in their royal heritage. Louis, a rather ungainly, reserved and indecisive character, stood in stark contrast to his radiant bride, who emanated boundless energy. Hailing from a background marked by a liberal upbringing in Vienna's court, where festivity and amusement reigned supreme, Marie Antoinette found herself thrust into an entirely different scenario upon entering the French court at Versailles, a distance of 20 kilometers from the heart of Paris. Here, unyielding routines of an uncompromising code of conduct dictated the rhythm of life. Yet, whenever a chance presented itself, the spirited young woman broke free from the constraints of the royal residence to immerse herself in the vibrant heart of Paris. According to a well-known rumour, Marie Antoinette once said about the starving French population, "Qu'ils mangent de la brioche et aiment ces vidéos," or "let them eat cake and like this video." Becoming the Queen. After the death of King Louis XV in May 1774, her husband was crowned King Louis XVI. As a result, Marie Antoinette ascended to the throne of France at the tender age of 18. Initially, the young queen enjoyed considerable popularity. Her arrival in Paris drew a staggering crowd of 50,000 people, eager to catch a glimpse of her in person. Amid the chaos, tragically, 30 individuals lost their lives. However, the queen's favourability swiftly waned, partly due to rumours of her extravagance and reports of numerous male and female lovers she was said to have entertained. However, the tales of the queen's luxurious lifestyle enraged many French citizens, especially considering the widespread poverty and hunger outside the palace walls. An unending stream of stories detailing various excesses committed by the queen fueled the growing discontent. Ultimately, Marie Antoinette became the embodiment of the decadence of power. Marie Antoinette exerted herself to treat the few common citizens she encountered with respect. Unlike the rest of the court, she refrained from riding her horse through the farmers' fields during hunts. However, her efforts at civility seemed to go unnoticed. On satirical caricatures, Marie Antoinette was depicted as a libertine, engaging in both heterosexual and homosexual affairs. Furthermore, rumours abounded about her extravagant sexual activities. After becoming the Queen of France in 1774, Marie Antoinette had the miniature village of Le Hameau constructed in the gardens of the Palace of Versailles at a considerable cost. Amid a picturesque landscape, pure white lambs and colourful cows frolicked around small cottages, a mill and a farm, creating a genuine rural idyll. There's a fortune spent to give the Queen's model village a shabby appearance. That money could have been invested in helping the real poor, giving them decent homes instead of hovels, complained the Marquis of Bommels, for instance. In the latter half of the 18th century, the French economy was in decline, and by the mid-1780s, the state was on the brink of bankruptcy. Wars, lost colonies, and mismanagement had depleted the royal treasury. Despite the Queen's efforts to cut back on her spending and adopt a more modest attire, she still became a symbol of the empire's hardships. The crisis worsened, and by 1789, many French citizens couldn't afford a simple meal. The people's anger turned towards the court, where the effects of the crisis were scarcely felt. Thus, in October, the Parisians marched to Versailles, demanding bread. The seed for the revolution, which posed a threat to both the monarchy and the royal family, had been planted. Many French citizens scornfully referred to Marie Antoinette as l'Autrichienne, French for the Austrian, which later morphed into l'autre chienne, French for the bitch. In satirical caricatures, she was often depicted as a harlot or nymphomaniac. Marie Antoinette reigned as the Queen of France for a total of 18 years. She occasionally engaged in state affairs, urging the king, for example, to dismiss Robert Jacques Turgot, a French economist and politician appointed to oversee finances under King Louis XVI. The king himself was not particularly known for his political prowess. State matters didn't captivate his interest to a great extent. Let's move on and dive into the French Revolution. When the French Revolution erupted in 1789, it became evident that maintaining power would be a daunting task for Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. In the initial days of the revolution, the king still held some sway. Marie Antoinette urged her husband to employ his veto power to thwart decisions that undermined the monarchy. She urged this so frequently that she earned the moniker Madame Veto. Eventually, the royal couple was compelled to reside in the heart of the capital city among the populace, forsaking the opulent Palace of Versailles. The Tuileries Palace in Paris, which had been vacant for over a century, was hastily prepared to accommodate them. Under constant surveillance day and night, the family effectively became prisoners of the revolutionaries, a reality that deeply troubled the Queen. "We are treated as criminals. It's nearly unbearable," she confided in a letter to her friend. "Living in constant fear for the safety of our loved ones is harrowing. We cannot pass a window without being cursed. Even when we venture out with the children, we're subjected to insults." Louis XVI held on to the hope that the revolution would wane on its own, but that hope was soon dashed. The authority of the monarchy was increasingly eroded, and turmoil gripped the entire nation. With growing unease, Marie Antoinette urged her husband to take action and restore his authority before it was too late. Following his wife's counsel, Louis sought assistance from various European monarchs, while Marie Antoinette appealed to her brother, Emperor Leopold II of the Holy Roman Empire, to send his army to the French border. In addition, she engaged in secret negotiations with revolutionary leader Honoré de Mirabeau, a moderate voice in the midst of a growing extremist clamour. Despite their many disagreements, both were united in their desire to preserve the monarchy. However, this alliance was short-lived. In April 1791, Mirabeau's sudden death abruptly ended the Queen's attempts to reverse the revolution from within. The tensions only escalated, and in the night of August 9th to the 10th, thousands of French citizens surrounded the new residence of the royal couple. "We will be back soon," Marie Antoinette had promised before seeking refuge in the National Assembly with her family. Shortly thereafter, a bloodthirsty mob of 20,000 Parisians stormed the palace. Servants and courtiers were stabbed or thrown out of windows, and the Swiss Guard was annihilated to the last man. Louis XVI was once and for all dethroned. Taking temporary shelter in the National Assembly, the royal couple helplessly witnessed the monarchy being abolished by the government. They ordered the royal family to be imprisoned in Le Temple, a former Templar fortress in Paris. On August 13th at 6 in the evening, Louis Capet, as the revolutionaries derogatorily referred to the dethroned king, Marie Antoinette, and their two frightened children took their final ride in the royal carriage. The coachmen were instructed to drive slowly and indirectly to the prison, allowing Parisians to savour the humiliation of the royal family. Yet Marie Antoinette, or the Austrian as she was disdainfully called, remained unyielding. Upright and proud, she traversed the cobbled streets en route to the prison. On September 21st, 1792, the monarchy was finally abolished, making way for the First French Republic. Louis and Marie Antoinette were downgraded to the status of ordinary citizens, known as Mr. and Mrs. Capet, due to their lineage to Hugh Capet, who was the King of France from 1987 to 1996. Queen's confidant brutally murdered. As the days tick by, the royal family lives a reclusive existence within the towering walls of the temple. Louis XVI spends time teaching history and geography to his young son, Louis Charles, while Marie Antoinette occupies herself with chess, embroidery, and the singing of Austrian nursery rhymes to her 13-year-old daughter. Despite the temple's more modest setting compared to their previous life, the meals continue to be as lavish as before. Louis XVI enjoys hearty servings of soup, meat, and desserts, often paired with red wine and the occasional champagne. On the contrary, Marie Antoinette reluctantly eats her meals, often scolding the servants and lamenting the constant watchful presence of the guards. Cut off from newspapers, Marie Antoinette learns from the distant cries of news vendors about the ongoing witch hunt. Those suspected of showing any support for the king are swiftly apprehended, leading to grim fates under the guillotine or brutal public reprisals. The horrors of the outside world hit closer than ever one day in September 1792. Disturbing screams echo from the garden. When Louis inquires, he's met with a chilling response. Marie-Thérèse Lamballe, a cherished friend of the First Lady-in-Waiting to Marie Antoinette, has been brutally murdered. Her severed head has been gruesomely displayed, with the intention of flaunting it before the former queen. Marie Antoinette lets out an anguished cry before collapsing in a faint. It marks a poignant moment as her composed facade shatters, witnessed by her children for the first time. Let's move on and find out what happened during the execution of the king. At the end of November 1792, a box containing personal letters from Louis is discovered in the Tuileries Palace. The king had hidden the box within a wall, but one of his confidants had betrayed the secret. Now, the Republic possesses decisive evidence of the former ruler's treachery. He had secretly corresponded with foreign monarchs, asking for their assistance in quelling the revolution. The hatred burns brighter than ever, and Marie Antoinette foresees what is about to unfold. For weeks, she hardly sleeps or eats. While Louis continues to indulge in his meals, his once beautiful wife transforms into a pale, fragile woman with red-rimmed eyes and white hair. She becomes so emaciated that her clothes hang shapelessly around her. Her strength wanes, and in December 1792, she also loses her husband. He has been charged with high treason. On the evening of January 20, 1793, Marie Antoinette is permitted to see Louis and the children. They understand the reason. The judges have denied Louis mercy, with the slight majority voting for the death penalty by guillotine. The young crown prince presses himself against his parents, and their elder sister sobs uncontrollably. The former king remains the most composed. He has come to terms with the fate that awaits him the next day. The family must bid farewell, and after a sleepless night, Marie Antoinette hears the sound of soldiers' boots on the stairs, followed by the opening of the door downstairs. The next sound she hears is the wheels of the cart that will carry her husband to the place of execution. Within an hour, Marie Antoinette will be a widow, acutely aware that she could be next in line to take her place on the carriage. Now let's explore the trial of the Queen. The former Queen of France prepares herself for a potential attack on her own life, but not on that of her children. On the start of July 1973, guards are sent to take away her 8-year-old son, under the pretext of rumours about an escape attempt. As he is the heir to the French throne, he is seen as a threat to the revolutionaries. Marie Antoinette clings tightly to her son Louis, refusing to let him go, till her daughter, Marie-Thérèse, is threatened. In the following nights, she hears the cries of her son, who is held captive elsewhere in the temple. A month later, Marie Antoinette also bids farewell to her daughter. On the start of August, she hears that she will be transferred to the conciergerie prison, also known as the waiting room of death. Although death no longer instills fear in her, Marie Antoinette deeply misses her children. Stripped of her possessions, including a locket containing locks of their hair, her health deteriorates rapidly. After 70 days, she appears in court with pale lips and almost translucent skin. With snowy white hair, braided and dressed in a white gown, the 37-year-old queen resembles a spectre. Similar to the trial against her husband, hers too is a fake trial. The former queen is not only accused of conspiring against the French Republic, but also of incest with her son. Despite the lack of concrete evidence for all the charges brought against her, Marie Antoinette is sentenced to death. It's October 14th, 1793, and a large crowd is present at her trial, where she faces various accusations. She listens impassively to the charges presented by the prosecutor, Antoine Fouquier, including sending money to her brother, plotting conspiracies, manipulating her husband Louis XVI, conspiring with foreign powers, having incest with her son, and unlawfully declaring her son as king. The charges are numerous, and she has only one day to prepare her defense. Over the course of 15 hours, witnesses are summoned to support the accusations, but the testimonies prove to be based on slander and gossip. Marie Antoinette vehemently denies the charges and shows renewed vigour in her responses. On October 15th, she undergoes another 16 hours of interrogation, but despite her exhaustion, she remains composed and answers questions. After a lengthy overnight deliberation, the jury withdraws to deliberate. Marie Antoinette is found guilty on all charges, and the death sentence is pronounced. Back in her cell, she writes a final letter to her sister-in-law, Elizabeth, emphasizing her innocence and expressing her sorrow over leaving her children. I have just been condemned, not to a dishonorable death of a criminal, but to reunite with your brother. I am as innocent as he is, and hope to be as strong in my final moments. I am calm, for my conscience is clear. It deeply saddens me that I must leave my children. You know that I have only lived for them. Now we're getting to the gruesome execution of the Queen. Shortly before Marie Antoinette had to leave the prison, her hair was cut off so that the guillotine's blade could do its work more efficiently. On the day of her execution, October 16, 1793, a massive crowd gathered in Paris to witness the death of the former Queen. To further humiliate her, Marie Antoinette was transported to the Place de la Révolution on a dung cart. The whole of Paris was in motion, with more than 30,000 soldiers patrolling the streets. Along the route to the Place de la Concorde, where the guillotine was set up, people tried to catch a glimpse of the condemned. As the cart entered the square, a wave of commotion swept through the crowd. Hundreds of thousands of Parisians had been waiting for hours, passing the time by gossiping and reading newspapers that proclaimed, "The whore will finally feel the executioner's snare." According to witness accounts, she displayed no fear on the scaffold and maintained her dignity. One story even reports that Marie Antoinette apologized when she accidentally stepped on an official's foot while ascending the scaffold. "I apologize, sir. It was not intentional." She was laid on a board and slid under the guillotine, and a few moments later, the blade fell. It was 12:15 when, as required by his duty, the executioner lifted the head of the deceased by its hair and showed it to the crowd. After the execution, the former Queen's body was placed in a coffin, reportedly with her head between her legs. The remains were interred at the cemetery of the Madeleine Convent. 29 years later, King Louis XVIII ordered the exhumation of the remains of Marie Antoinette and Louis XVI, and their reinterment in the crypt of the Basilica of St. Denis. What tragic fate did the children experience? The revolutionaries viewed Marie Antoinette and Louis XVI's children as a threat to the new France. As a result, Louis Charles was taken away from his already imprisoned mother in July 1793 and held captive in a different location. In prison, the young prince was cared for by a cobbler named Simon. Royalists even proclaimed the boy as King Louis XVII. He remained incarcerated. Initially, there were attempts to sway Louis Charles towards supporting the revolution, but it didn't have any results. On June 8, 1795, he passed away in prison at the tender age of 10. In the last 6 months of his life, the prince chose not to speak. Soon after his death, rumours circulated that the young king was not actually deceased. For years, individuals emerged claiming to be the boy and futilely asserting their right to the throne. The most famous of these impostors was the German charlatan, Karl Wilhelm Naundorff. Their second child, Louis Joseph, had already succumbed to tuberculosis in 1789 at the age of merely 7. Sophie Beatrix, the fourth child of the royal couple, didn't survive past her first birthday due to the same illness. The only child who reached adulthood and survived the French Revolution was Marie Therese. In 1795, after several years of captivity, she was handed over to Austria as part of a prisoner exchange. The 17-year-old girl grew into a strong woman, whom Emperor Napoleon referred to as the only man in her family. 4 years later, she married Louis Anton of Bourbon. After a troubled and childless marriage with her cousin, she passed away in 1851 at the age of 72. In 1830, albeit for just 20 minutes, Marie Therese became the Queen of France. Marie Antoinette's tragic tale echoes through history, a narrative of opulence turned to agony during a tumultuous era. Her once gilded life descended into the shadows of revolution, leading to her heart-wrenching separation from her children and her eventual journey to the guillotine. What do you think of the tragic fate of Marie Antoinette and her beloved? Do you think it is fair what happened, or do you have any other feelings about the story? Now you know the tragic fate of Marie Antoinette, I highly recommend you watch the next story about an intriguing icon. Simply tap the video on the right.